and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Kenny McBride. And joining me in the studio today is Sam Paton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. And joining us by Skype is Ruth Watson from Keep Scotland the Brand. How are we both doing this morning?
Hi.
Very well,
Good, thanks.
Excellent. Well, our first story today, we're looking at the general election, which of course has been dominating news in Britain for the last couple of weeks. We had the leaders speaking on Question Time this week. Did either of you watch those debates?
Oh, yes, I did. I was glued to it in the way that one might sit watching a train crash in slow motion.
Yeah, it was very much like that, wasn't it? I caught bits of it. I never watched it live, but I caught up later on with it and kind of, picked what I watched and kind of ignored the rest. Yeah, it was a car crash, yes.
And once again, I mean, this happened at the last election cycle as well, where we saw floods of English people on Twitter and Facebook and whatever saying, why can't we vote for Nicola Sturgeon? Once again, she does seem to have given a much better performance than the leaders of the UK-wide parties.
She comes across a lot more professional and stateswoman-like. The rest of them, they seem to kind of talk down to people. That's the impression I get. They're very much dictating to people. They're talking down to them, whereas Nicola seems to engage more with people. And she does do her best to answer questions a lot more honestly. When she's having to give one of the things I'd noticed about her during the question time is when she was talking and she says, I'm going to have to go into the kind of political, she'll admit when she's going into the political mode. And people are more engaging with that. It's a lot more honest rather than the normal, like, this is who we are and this is what we're telling you. But that's my opinion of it, whether other people agree. But no, Nicola's a lot more engaging and a lot more kind of talkative with people.
And Ruth, what did you make of Sturgeon's performance in particular? Did you think she was the winner, as a lot of the media have been saying?
I think that the First Minister has got a very measured approach when she talks. As a previous broadcaster and somebody who did a lot of political programmes in the past, I watch these things with sort of two different heads on. I've got the watching as a broadcaster and programme producer, but also watching it as somebody who's interested in politics. And I think when I'm listening to the First Minister, I think she comes across as somebody who understands that she is speaking for the entire of a nation, not just her political party. And that's why, to pick up on what Sam's saying, I respect the fact that she will say when she is going into talking about the party political as opposed to her position as First Minister. And in all fairness, I thought that Jeremy Corbyn gave a very good account of himself. I think that Labour is in a real muddle at the moment. Their policies aren't clear. I think there are so many very capable people. Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer spring out as being two very genuine voices. And I think that when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader, I was quite hopeful, because as a former peace camper, as somebody who spent 2 years living in Faslane Peace Camp and at Greenham, and who has served time at Her Majesty's pleasure for my activities within the base at Faslane, I really was hopeful that somebody who had stood for on an anti-nuclear platform for so much of his life would be an authentic voice. And I think that, for me, is a big difference, is that when Jeremy Corbyn is speaking, I hear the party. I hear that the things that he stood for decades, and let's not forget, he's been a Eurosceptic all of his political life. And I don't hear Jeremy Corbyn's voice. I hear the puppeteers in the background. And I think that is what is refreshing about the First Minister, is that she is able to speak as the First Minister of Scotland, as well as represent the party. And I can understand why people across England are frustrated that they can't vote for her, although of course they can join the SNP. I think London, there's a branch in London. But I think that comparing that with Jo Swinson and Boris Johnson. It was those two last segments were excruciating because neither of those political leaders are able to talk with any sincerity, in my opinion, when you look at their voting record and, in fact, their professional record as well. For Jo Swinson, again, as an anti-nuclear campaigner, for Jo Swinson to talk blithely about hitting the button on nuclear weapons, like somehow that makes her brilliant, and then talk about global warming. Well, quite frankly, there's no planet left if you're going to set the nukes off. So I think that her moral standpoint is absolutely lacking. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, one thing, I mean, as we think about Scotland in the UK context, one of the big issues in this election seems to be the idea of another Scottish independence referendum. Boris Johnson, both in the head-to-head with Jeremy Corbyn and in this Question Time special, has repeatedly talked about vote Labour for 2 more referendums. He keeps talking about a Corbyn-Sturgeon alliance and how dangerous that is for the UK. Why do you think it is that that we're now seeing the Tories actively saying Scottish independence is a bad thing and using that as a vote winner in England? That seems to be quite a new thing that we're seeing.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very apparent. It's I think basically they are seeing Scottish independence as a real threat now. Certainly since Brexit, it's become very apparent how little Scotland as a country has a say in what goes on in the UK political system. And, you know, more and more people are going towards independence, even previous no voters in the 2014 campaign referendum. But, yeah, I think they are genuinely scared of the movement of the independence campaign in Scotland. And basically, I think Boris Johnson is clutching at straws. He's basically in my opinion, a clown. He's got, where he's just everything that you don't want in a politician. He blatantly, he's blatantly lied. He's blatantly, he's just not a nice person. But as a political, somebody that's interested in politics, and just as a mum watching what's going on, it's quite scary what's going on and what's coming out with the general election and with Brexit. There seems to be a kind of undercurrent, coming from the kind of Tories and, quite anti-immigration and their policies, and there seems to be a kind of undercurrent of kind of hatred there, which is not something as a mum I want my kids to grow up in. And as Scotland, we don't want that in our country. We've made that quite apparent with the Brexit referendum. We wanted to stay part of Europe. We enjoy having people from other countries coming here. We embrace that. But yeah, I think they're scared of Scottish independence. I think they are actually genuinely scared. And they're scared of it. It's gathering momentum, and you see that every day. Just as a normal, everyday person going to work and everything, you hear more and more people talking about it. People who have never engaged in politics are now becoming interested. The younger generations are getting more involved and more interested. There is definitely a big movement in Scotland that it's become quite apparent.
Well, I think that the tactic probably has got some, he's got some political savvy behind it, because there are those, I'm sure, within England and Northern Ireland, Wales as well, I guess, who would view that as an existential threat. You have people who value the United Kingdom and the 4 nations within it. But within Scotland as well, I'm hearing that there are people who are responding to that. I think that what the Conservative Party in Scotland and from Westminster as well, what they're trying to do is to mop up those voters who think that Brexit and the Union sort of come before all else, and people who might previously have aligned with the Labour Party because the Labour Party in Scotland, Richard Leonard's position is very clearly pro-union. For Jeremy Corbyn to be very clearly wavering on that, and if not wavering. I mean, Corbyn's position, I think, has probably always been quite clear until he became the leader of the Labour Party. As with many things, his policies have become slightly more obscured. But I think that the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats very much are trying to align themselves as the party of the union. And so I think Labour could get really hammered this time around. I'm interested watching the local by-election results coming through the last couple of weeks. And the Labour vote seems to be the one that's getting hit. Voters are either, it seems to me, you're seeing the Conservatives and the SNP making gains, the Liberal Democrats making slight gains, the Greens have had a whisker of a gain, but it seems to be that Labour are hemorrhaging votes to both sides. So I think it is becoming quite a polarised. I think it's becoming quite polarised. If you're a unionist and you want to remain within the EU, then you're going to vote Lib Dem. If you're going either other direction, I think Labour has just disappeared in Scotland. To be honest, I'm not sure what their future is with the current policies they have.
Yeah, I saw one headline today projecting the SNP to win 49 seats and for Labour to be completely wiped out in Scotland, which would be a big change from what we all remember from even just 20 years ago.
I'm not sure about Ian Murray. I think
dominance.
Ian Murray within Edinburgh, he's got a pretty substantial margin, and I'm interested to see that he's running his campaign as a marginal seat, given that he had such a comfortable majority the last time around. And regardless of what you think of his party politics, I understand that he has been a very effective and accessible constituency MP, which is very different from some of the other Edinburgh, more notable Edinburgh Holyrood politicians, perhaps not so far from him. But I think that if Ian Murray loses his seat, then Labour really is in trouble for a very long time to come. So I think that his is the seat to watch in many respects. The thing is, though, all of these projections mean nothing if people don't get up off their backsides and vote. And as somebody who believes passionately in democracy, it almost doesn't matter to me if what people are voting, as long as they're exercising their democratic right to vote, because I find it much easier to accept political outcomes if I think they genuinely represent a vote which has been reached through people who have truly understood the issues or have made themselves informed of the issues and have gone out and voted genuinely believing and understanding the issues. So there's quite a few caveats in there, but I'm the one thing that concerns me is how low the turnout for these elections might be. So I am heartened to see how many youngsters are signing up to vote for the first time.
Yeah, I was just going to add that.
I mean, a straw poll, completely unrepresentative. My eldest daughter is at university now, and she says that a considerable number of her peer group have said that they're not going to bother to vote. So you can imagine that I'm telling her that they've got to get out and get informed and start making choices. But the most important thing is they use their vote.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree with Ruth there. Yeah, it needs to be, I'm the same as you. I can understand and I can accept people's voting choices if they've went out and voted, but when they're not registered to vote and they don't vote, the democratic overall of the voting system, it's not true. It doesn't represent the country properly. So if people go out there and register and vote and actually use their democratic right, it gives us a bigger picture of what's actually happening in the country. But I think that's been deliberate, having the general election in December, as they're hoping for a low turnout, especially bad weather and, round about it starts round about that time of year. And again, that's all about people maybe helping people to get them to the voting places, as voting stations. But yeah, my gut instinct is they've done that deliberate because they know they'll be elderly, won't be able to go out and vote with bad weather. Also with dark nights, people come home from work, are they going to go to the polling station because they've come home from work, it's a dark night, it's cold, maybe raining, wet. So I think there's a wee bit of there's been a bit of thought given behind that one with the date, the 12th of December, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, even if people like ourselves can help others along, give them a lift or, encourage as many people as possible to vote on the day.
Absolutely.
I think you give the parties much more credit than perhaps they deserve, saying that there's been a plan behind any of this. I suspect that we're really looking at a sort of the thick of it version of politics here. It is just been. I think more of it has to do with the deadline for Brexit. I think more of it has to do. I still think that Johnson would, the Prime Minister, would take us off a cliff edge. I think a lot of it has to do. I very much subscribe to the theory that if you want to understand why Brexit is happening, you follow the money and you look at the EU tax directives laws coming in January. I suspect that there's a lot to do with that rather than politics writ large. So I suspect that there is an element of Johnson hoping to run the clock down and push us off a cliff edge. Because when you think, for example, that the Duke of Grosvenor, if my statistics are correct, if the Duke of Grosvenor were to pay his full tax bill, then his tax bill alone would be enough to pay for the entire social security budget of the UK for 1 year.
Wow.
I think there's a lot of reasons why people are quite keen not to see the EU tax directive be implemented in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, on tax, Boris Johnson published the Tory manifesto called "Get Brexit Done, Unleash Britain's Potential," which is one of those phrases that I just can't be doing with. I can't deal with these just silly names for manifestos. But he's promising this huge splurge of spending while saying that income tax, VAT and national insurance will not rise for 5 years, which presumably means a huge increase in borrowing, which is something that the Tories have consistently, especially in the last 10 years, tried to make themselves the party of responsible spending and pitched the whole of austerity as responsible government. And now with Brexit on the horizon, we're seeing this promise of massive spending increases. Why do you think...
the magic money tree comes out pretty quickly when it suits folk. When you think the devastation that has been wrought on people's lives as the neoliberalism of austerity was forced down people's throats, even as borrowing has increased beyond exponential levels, I find it very, actually almost distasteful to hear all the promises now that are being made of spending. Not to be party political about it, but to look at the facts and statistics. When you have a party that has cut over 20,000 police officers, suddenly saying, oh, it's great because we're going to increase police officers, I'm not sure how that's credible. And I'm not sure how it is credible to suddenly say, oh, there's going to be money galore, when I have had meetings with two of the Brexit negotiators, two of the trade negotiators that are actually being consulted by Westminster. They're part of the advice being given on Brexit. They're Brexit consultants, and they're World Trade Organization trade negotiators. And they told me, and the SM, it wasn't just me directly, I was at a large meeting of people who are trying to work out how to keep food on the plates. And by the end of that meeting, literally people's heads were in their hands. The stark reality was so gruesome. But these trade negotiators said the biggest problem they were having while advising on Brexit is that they had never before been asked to be part of a negotiation where they knew that whatever the outcome was, they were negotiating to make the country in question poorer. And that, to me, I think is... I am appalled at the lack of integrity and the lack of honesty that is coming from some of the political leaders, because everybody has the information. Everybody within the political sphere. If me, a wee quine in Kirriemuir, if I have the information, then the political leaders have the information. And for people to come out with manifestos which are blatantly untrue, that does make me angry, because I think it's one thing to say to people, look, Brexit's coming, it's going to be a bit rubbish for a few years, and people are going to be really suffering. But if you think it's worth it, let's go for it. Well, quite frankly, personally, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think we should go for it. But if people were being able to make their choices based on true facts, at least that would be something credible. So I find it outrageous when I hear the lies being told about the England's NHS and the knock-on effects that's going to have on Scotland's NHS, because Scotland's budget for the Scotland's NHS is the best performing in the whole of the UK out of the 4 nations. And our budget is entirely dependent, because of the Barnett formula, on the amount of money spent in England. But the amount of money spent, because so much of England's NHS services have already been privatised, that pot of money that has gone into the private sector is not there to be Barnettised. So our slice, Scotland's budget, reduces every time another piece of the pie is privatised off. And for people to be told that new hospitals are being built, and even the way that the A&E waiting times are measured is completely different. And there's a huge amount of ignorance, and I think that I'm afraid to say that my former employer, I worked for the BBC many years ago, and I am horrified by the poor job that is being done in explaining all of this to the nation.
Mm-hmm. And Ruth, just very quickly, before we get off the general election and start to talk about things that might actually, keep us sane, could you just go through a little bit of what Keep Scotland the Brand specifically is concerned about when it comes to Brexit?
But there's so much. Where do you start? So the issue, not to get too technical, but the issue of divergence and convergence are two massive issues. Divergence is where our standards diverge from the standards that the European Union, which is our largest trading partner, will accept. So if, for example, the low food standards in America, the low weight, the standards that animals are reared to in America, a farmer in America who wants to sell to the European Union markets has to have 2 different fields of livestock. And because you've got the local fields for the livestock that's pumped full of growth hormones and antibiotics and various other nasties and aren't kept in that great conditions, and then you've got the other livestock which are raised to the standards required within the EU. So if we diverge, that means that we will find it, the further we diverge, the harder it will be for Scotland's farmers to sell to the European markets. On top of that, you have, if we will never be able to compete with this sort of stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap philosophy of farming that happens in America, and so to lose our reputation, it will be massive. But because it will be very hard to compete within the American market, the risk of our farms going out of business is significant, and all the damage that will do. 1 in 5 jobs in Scotland is related to food and drink in some way, and if we lose that quality reputation and stop being able to sell internationally because our standards have been compromised, or people are fearful that our standards are no longer provably high, then that would be a massive impact. But on top of that, one of the things that I think is beyond immoral is the fact that currently it doesn't matter whether you're buying something off the budget shelf or whether you're getting something at a food bank, because something has happened so desperately to our society that people can't afford to feed themselves even though they're working. That appalls me. But even if you're getting something from a food bank, the standard of the food you're getting is the same as if you were going to the most expensive delicatessen. The quality might be different, but the standard is the same. And if the Brexit scenario happens, which I know for a fact, because the American ambassador has made it clear, that the scenario that the Americans want is for our food standards to change, then people are going to end up getting ill and not knowing why. Americans have got 10 times the rate of food poisoning per head of population than we do. And it is appalling. I mean, just appalling. Hemorrhagic versions of E. coli, just really nasty stuff. So there's so many reasons, but that's a sort of a distilled version of one of the things that really worries me.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ruth. Moving on now to a story that you might know a little bit more about, Sam. There's been a lot of criticism this week of the commercialisation of Edinburgh, particularly the Princes Street Gardens Christmas market, which was dubbed Disney, D-I-S-N-A-E land, Disneyland, this week. Now, obviously, for quite some time you've been fighting the Flamingo Land at Loch Lomond, and this is another example of planning laws seemingly not suiting what the people of the area actually want.
Yeah, it does.
What did you make of this story?
Yeah, I've been kind of watching this quite closely for a number of reasons. One, because of obviously my connections with Save Loch Lomond, but another from a personal point of view, because I'm a crafter in Scotland and that's what I do for a living. And one of the problems we have as professional crafters is sometimes it's quite difficult getting into these markets and, you know, and being able to sell your wares. And a lot of these markets are advertised and marketed as being Scottish artisan crafters and Scottish produce and so forth. And what you actually find is a lot of the case that's not the scenario, because the prices of these markets to rent one of these stalls is absolutely phenomenal, and the contracts behind them as well. So what you do get is people who are business people, self-employed people, which again, you know, they're supporting the community, they're, you know, paying their taxes and things. But when it comes to the point where they're marketing these things as Scottish artisan produce and they're not, there becomes an issue. A fundamental issue of misrepresentation. You know, if it's people going to, you know, wherever, buying things in bulk and importing and whatever, it doesn't bode well in terms of the tourism industry and the visitor coming to Edinburgh, because people are going expecting a certain standard. They're expecting to go to these Christmas markets, getting Scottish artisan produce, which is genuine Scottish artisan produce, whether it's food and drink or products. And they're not getting that. I think one of the articles I had seen where somebody had described it as a flea market, which I've not been to Edinburgh Christmas market yet. I was thinking of going at some point. Now I'm not so sure whether to go, because it's already the articles are coming out. What also concerns me, it's another example of local planning and the people that plan these things that are behind the scenes of the council and the councillors not actually understanding what the locals want in their local community. You know,
I think they do. I think they do understand what the locals want. I just don't think they particularly care.
I
mean, I spent years. I mean, I'm from Edinburgh. I was born and raised there, and I remember the Christmas market starting out and really loving it. I mean, it was pithy and it was sweet. And now I look, the trees in Princes Street Gardens have been cut down, and we're told that that's for visibility, and then suddenly you see the entire thing just basically temporary structures put up. Well, the cynic wonders if perhaps all those beautiful trees were cut down so they could stick an extra stall in where there was once a tree. And then you get the palisades, these huge barriers put up. This view that is a fundamental part of Edinburgh. The Princes Street Gardens are for the people of Edinburgh, and they're being privatised. It's like everything else. Suddenly, anything of value, we just throw it out the window for a quick buck. It's disgraceful.
I completely agree with you.
Everything you're saying about the quality, it is absurd that somebody can bring some textiles manufactured in a sweatshop in Bangladesh or China, where people are being given a living wage, and they bring it over here, and if somebody's just like put a wee bit of stitching on, suddenly it's finished in Scotland or made in Scotland. It's disgraceful. Quality has to mean quality, and clear labels have to give customers confidence. I go to a market like that, not because I want to go and get something that I could get out the bar is dead cheap, but because I want to go and find something which is, as you say, it's artisan, it's had somebody's hand upon it, it's has thought, it's had quality. And a real issue, I speak to quite a lot of people within the textile sector, And a huge issue is the fact that people come to Edinburgh, they wander around the tart and tat shops, buy something really, you buy a kilt for 18 quid and wonder, go back to your home country, go, oh, Scottish quality is rubbish, this is falling apart. And it's the only thing that's been Scottish about it has been the Benson and Hedge, the fag smoked beneath it as it's been sold. There's just no quality there. And I think that we have to do more to not only get our textiles back and our artisanry and have pride in that and market it genuinely and authentically. I think we have to be more diligent about calling out councils and talking to trading standards and saying, well, what is it we actually want from our culture and our communities? And also, I do think there's a lot to be said about bringing back more of our cultural credibility. How about we wear more of these fabrics? Now, not everybody can afford to buy fabrics that will last 30 years because not everybody can afford to feed themselves, as I've already said. But we have to do more, I think, to make our culture part of our daily life. And for those of us who can afford to do that, I think that we should be supporting producers like yourself. But I think that politically we have to be talking to our councillors and saying, these are values which we think are important, and let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's meant to be, the Edinburgh market's meant to be this lovely faux German experience. Now, all power to the Germans. I love their markets. And in fact, in Germany, they're not called German Christmas markets. They're just markets. But how about we make something Scottish about it and local about it and have some authenticity?
Yeah, I totally agree. Our markets, we should have more, Scottish artisan Christmas markets. And celebrating our culture and our heritage. But no, Edinburgh is just a classic example of where it's just completely went wrong. Money has become the main object rather than the quality. And as Ruth said, the trees being chopped down, it does seem quite apparent. It's all about money making, fit a couple extra stalls in. These stalls are not cheap to hire. And you've got to sign a contract to say that you're going to be there for the succession of the market. I do think there's a lot of money behind it, and I think our planning and our councillors need to be listening more to the local people, the residents, but also the general producers of Scotland, and because at the end of the day, it's us that's bringing the money in, it's us that's sharing the money around the economy, it's us that's growing the economy. We do need to have a pride in what we achieve. There is so many amazing artisan crafters and food producers out there. We need to be celebrating them more, and we should be growing that industry. And again, that would grow jobs as well. It would grow employment, it would grow training. I could go on all day about this one.
But it's also the aspect of being inspired to set up your own business.
Yes.
There's so much talent in Scotland. There's so much, I lived not far from Duncan of Jordanston, which is one of the School of Art and Design, and it has got some incredible talent coming out of there. And I love when I'm in parts of the continent or when I lived in Australia, the amount of small boutique shops which were. There wasn't an issue with shops being empty because people had that energy and thinking, actually, if I've got a good product, I can set up shop and people will come and buy it, because people they hadn't become the sort of the drones of sort of thinking, oh well, if it's not the same 5 shops you'll see on every high street across the country, then I'm not going to go into it. It's people having the courage to have our own sense of style, to have the courage to kind of go, actually, well, how about go in there and I'll try something authentic and real. But people often don't want to buy from small shops or boutiques, partly because they can't see them, but also because the confidence and the quality isn't there. And I think if people recognise that artisan genuinely means, for example, a piece of clothing that will last you for 20, 30 years, then if they have the money, they will be prepared to spend an extra 20 quid on that. But because people aren't sure if they're just buying other junk from somewhere else, it's got better marketing values on it, I think the confidence is shot. So I think we will, if we grow our confidence in our own produce and our own artisanry, then that will have a positive effect going forward.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Well, from some of our local government issues here to local government in Hong Kong. We're expecting this week, in fact today, to see the local elections. These are the district council elections that are held in Hong Kong every 4 years. Normally these are quite subdued elections, usually a very low turnout. Councillors don't have a lot of power. But these are actually the only free direct elections that Hong Kong has. And of course, given the months and months of pro-democracy campaigning, there are now pro-democracy candidates standing for the first time in 452 wards. That's every ward in Hong Kong. So this is the first real electoral test, and perhaps the only electoral test that these campaigners are going to see. How closely have you two been following the Hong Kong situation?
I haven't been following it very closely. I've just been kind of, every now and again kind of kicking in, kicking out. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how it goes. But I remember, as we were saying before, going way back to Hong Kong, going back to Beijing from the UK, there was fear way back then of how things were going to progress down the generations about democracy in Hong Kong. So I'm a bit wary of what's happening. It'll be interesting to see how it progresses and what the outcome's going to be. But no, I haven't been keeping a very close eye on it lately, as late.
Ruth, what are your thoughts?
It's so complicated. So I lived in Southeast Asia for a while and never made it to Hong Kong, but many of my friends, their families had moved to Singapore and to Malaysia from Hong Kong when sort of back in the early 1900s when communism took over. And there's a particular concern, I think, about what is happening, because on the one hand, there's real genuine anger at what the British did. So one of my friends, she said that she remembers, she's a little girl growing up, she remembered her granny sitting in the corner of the house smoking opium because of the Opium Wars, because a whole generation of Chinese had been turned into opium addicts through the cynicism of the colonialists. So there was a real understanding that Hong Kong was an anomaly that had been really sort of the last outpost of colonialism in the Far East, from British colonialism in the Far East. But that correlated directly with the concern about China and what a terribly oppressive regime China is. Just look at what's happening to the Uyghurs, and there's no. What's happening if China doesn't want you to have democracy, then you're not going to have democracy. But actually, I sort of look at the different techniques that are used across the world, and actually we can't be too smug about our own grip on democracy, because there are different groups that use different tactics, and I'm not sure that our democracy is not under threat anymore either. But so when Hong Kong was handed back to the Chinese, we talk about the Hong Kong independence or Hong Kong going back, but the word in Chinese translates into homecoming, and that really does show the way that a lot of Hong Kongers also viewed it, was that actually it was them being able to go back sort of to being a Chinese culture rather than having a colonialist imposition upon them. But you look at Taiwan, for example, and Taiwan, I think, will be watching this with real concern, because the Taiwanese often feel that there's a pincer movement happening against them, and although Taiwan is not under the Chinese influence in the same way, they feel that they can feel the vibrations of the rattling of the sabers, and there's huge concern. So what concerns me, are many things that concern me about what's happening in Hong Kong, and one of them being the potential of a bloodbath. One of my former colleagues, a really lovely wifey, she was the only European in Tiananmen Square when the massacre happened there, and her account is quite staggering. And so I am concerned that the Chinese will wield an influence that is not entirely healthy and downright dangerous for the lives of many of these people. So I don't know the extent to which international observers are going to be there. I don't know the extent to which tampering in the process will be allowed to happen or not. It certainly is the case that Lim, the politician who's sort of in charge of Hong Kong, that her policies, the policies that she's been told to implement, basically, which kind of brought all this down upon us. I don't see that there's going to be. I'm more worried this is going to be like a sort of Hong Kong version of the Arab Spring, which starts off with potential and ends up with catastrophe. So I will watch with interest, because I don't see how the Chinese government will allow Hong Kong to be filled with politicians who go against the might of China. It will be a test to see. It will be a real test to see how mature China feels on the international stage and domestically, but I'm not sure that we're looking at a China that is prepared to let democracy really have a voice.
Yeah, I mean, we have heard reports that every polling station is going to be guarded by riot police, so they're clearly not expecting it to go smoothly. We will, of course, bring you the any developments on that through the week on Scotland at 7. But in Syria, or rather here, in relation to Syria, the Home Office has said that no more orphans of the Syrian conflict, even British citizens, will not be allowed to return in the foreseeable future. Home Office source said, "We feel there are legitimate security concerns here. Returnees, even children, are a security risk. Our view is that repatriations can only be looked at on a case-by-case basis." And Boris Johnson said, "I think the situation in Syria is very difficult and very dangerous, and I think it has been a great success that some orphan children have been brought back, but I think it would be over-optimistic to say that we could do that in every single case." Which I think any right-thinking person is going to look at that and go, they're children. How much of a security risk can they possibly be? So Sam, what do we make of this?
Yeah, from a mum point of view, I just think it's absolutely appalling. They're children. They have probably seen the worst in human nature. What happened to compassion? A bit of love and care? Yes. Bring them over. Yes, adopt them into our society. If their families are here, get them back to their families. These are children. They are going to be traumatised. As I say, they've probably seen the worst of human nature that we could never even imagine. I'm a great believer that, if you're going to leave these children there in these appalling conditions, then these children are going to grow up mentally and emotionally scarred. We have a duty of care as human beings to look after any child in any war conflict or any conflict whatsoever, whether it's home or abroad. These children need counselling, they need care, they need specialist help. As a mum, it absolutely angers me that, you could actually view children as being a danger and a security risk. No, I've got, words. Yeah, I'm actually quite angry about, at someone, as you said, right-minded people. These are children, they're probably suffering from post-traumatic, all sorts of other mental health issues. Yeah, they need help.
So the issue really is, from a legal point of view, are they British citizens and do they have the right to come back? The answer clearly is yes, they do. Yeah. And if they have the right to come back, then we have a duty under international law to bring them back. They're our problem. They're not the problem of the Kurds. They're not the problem of the Turks. They're British children. And many of them may well have been born without documents in the so-called caliphate. But the issue is that they came from parents who were raised in Britain, are British, and so are our problem. You don't go exporting your problems and just dumping it overseas and thinking it's going to end well. And it's one of the few occasions you will ever hear me saying anything good about Dominic Raab, because I understand that he fought Priti Patel, who is a character that one would not wish to spend long at a dinner party with, and so Raab insisted on bringing these orphans home, and against Patel's sort of judgment, whatever that might be. But the issue has to be that if you want to set yourself up as being a forward-thinking nation, you have to act with forward-thinking policies. These children actually may well be a risk. Yes, they may well be a risk going forward, because they have been brainwashed and have seen horrific things that no child ever should see. So they might be a danger, but you know what? That is a danger that we have to deal with and bring them back, help their families, help them reintegrate with their families, give them the support that they need, give them the counselling, give them the de-radicalisation support. But you are going to give people more ammunition. If to look at it in its most callous way, you're going to give people all the ammunition that you want. If you want to radicalise wider parts of society, either here or overseas, then you just have to say, actually, this is what this country stands for. It only means that when it's if these kids were blonde and blue-eyed, I can guarantee you they would be brought back into the fold pretty quickly. And I think that is one of the undercurrent of Islamophobia, the undercurrent of racism that goes behind all this is something which is not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on people around the world, and it's not lost on the various communities that those children have come out of within the UK. They are British. It doesn't matter what they look like. They are British children, and predominantly I'm assuming that they have come out of particular communities across England. So you're talking about children who are probably third or fourth generation English, and they have the right to be. Their families have helped build up the economy in their communities. Their families are integral parts of their community. Why would we abandon them? Their families, their parents have done terrible things and should face court and should face justice. I'm not just about bringing the children and the orphans back. I think we have to take responsibility for all of the British citizens that are out there. Bring them back, put them through, absolutely put them into the courts, absolutely deal with them. Make sure that they can't go radicalising other people. But you know what? Actually, the people who have lived through the horrors that they could be a very valuable part of de-radicalising and de-escalating the vile cult of Daesh. Because I lived in Muslim country. Malaysia is a Muslim country. I'm mixed race. I have Muslim family, and they are appalled by the philosophy of Daesh. I've got so many Iraqi friends who have lived, their families were under Daesh rule. It is appalling. This is not Islam. The people from North Africa and the Middle East and Malaysia, for example, other Muslim countries, this does not represent the Islam that the vast majority of Muslims look at. I mean, it's like holding people responsible. Like holding a Roman Catholic from Lewis responsible for the Spanish Inquisition. It's not what is real. So how about we get these people back and de-radicalise them, and actually we really have to address the festering Islamophobia that is allowing to push through our society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, back in London, the Victims Commissioner is demanding that the Metropolitan Police explain its decision not to pursue a full investigation into claims that a teenager was trafficked to the UK to have sex with Prince Andrew. This relates to the case of Virginia Roberts, a case that we've all heard a great deal about this week. The Prince himself has now said that he will withdraw from public duties. So he now gets to claim his civil list money without actually doing any work for it, which is nice. But this is an interesting case. The Met says it has investigated all the available evidence, but has decided not to pursue a full investigation. That it's not going to pursue any kind of prosecution on this, despite there being some fairly compelling evidence that this girl was trafficked here for sexual exploitation. Is this just the Royals getting away with what the Royals do, or do you think there's something else to this?
There's a couple of different ways you can look at this. Yes, I think it's the Royals getting away with what they do. I think it's them using their privilege, sex trafficking of minors, children, and vulnerable people into UK is a very serious problem. I know down locally we've had people that have been found who have been trafficked into Scotland. But no, I think there's something fundamentally wrong about this. Prince Andrew should definitely face the consequences the way anyone else faces the consequences. It's just, I've been kind of keeping a close eye on this. It is absolutely disgusting. It also shows how the judicial system is failing trafficking victims, sexual victims. And at the end of the day, it's still child abuse. It doesn't matter, how you...
Yeah. I mean, we should stress that nothing is proved here.
Nothing's proved. The allegations.
These are allegations against.
But however, yes, it needs to be.
It does seem that there's evidence there that
if there's evidence there, it should be investigated. He should be taken in for questioning, just the same way anybody else would be. And he should be treated the exact same way. At the moment, there just seems to be a kind of level of privilege. Mm-hmm. But there seems to be something fundamentally wrong when it comes to investigating a lot of these cases, whether it's royalty or people, middle class, politicians, very wealthy whatever. People, yeah, there seems to be a kind of two-tier system, which needs to be looked at. That needs to be fundamentally looked at. We see and we hear of it all the time through the media, social media, mainstream media, even within our own communities as well. And I think there needs to be something needs to be done. Something needs to be definitely looked at. There needs to be but again, how do you police the ones who are meant to be basically policing, not the police themselves, but when it's the laws ourselves, how do you police them?
It's not about policing, who polices those. The police should be doing the job. The police should be the ones who are investigating without fear and without favour. Yeah. That's the whole point. That's why we have a judicial system which is meant to be independent of influence. And if the police were able to do their job, then that would be fine. Why aren't they? Why aren't the international the Prince Andrew has been asked if he will cooperate with investigations happening in America, where the crimes, many of the crimes are alleged to have taken place. So why aren't the police doing their job? Why isn't there somebody chapping on the door and doing an interview? And I think that we have so many issues to do with human trafficking and the rights of people. And I have to say that we are truly in the upside down when I find myself agreeing with Andrew Neil, who is one of the most contemptuous people I've found myself watching in recent years. And when I can't remember the name of the woman, but she was a royal watcher, and she kept on going on about this child being a prostitute, and as though that's somehow justified. It's back to the old days where people went, well, if they're raped and they're a prostitute, it doesn't matter. If you are raped as a prostitute, it is still rape, even if she was an underage prostitute. Well, I think that actually, if somebody, a prostitute who is over the age of consent, is a prostitute and is worthy of the full rights and protections that the law affords them. Somebody who is being paid for sex, who is beneath the age of consent, is not a prostitute. She's a trafficked minor.
Yeah.
She's a child. And that was one of the few occasions I found myself agreeing with not Andrew Neil, Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan, it was a programme he was on. And Piers Morgan actually, to do him credit, really had a go at this woman, because she was trying to make out that somehow it didn't matter that somebody was saying that they had been raped because that person was a prostitute, and it didn't matter that she was underage because she had been working as a prostitute. Now, many years ago, when I was working on the Speaking Out programme, I interviewed a young woman at the age of 16. She had stopped being a prostitute, and because she had managed to beat her at that point, beat her addiction for drugs. She had been a prostitute, an underage prostitute, working to get money for drugs. That's a 16-year-old. There were grown men who were having sex with her when she was 14 years old. Now, you may well be able to put makeup on and pretend that, maybe people could say, oh, well, it was dark and we didn't know. But the reality is, if you have got children putting on a face and going out and selling their bodies for sex, the other side of that equation is there's a man somewhere paying for it, and it's usually a man paying for it. And if Prince Andrew had thought that he was having a bona fide night with a woman and he was paying her for sex, and he thought, well, it was just a transaction, there's a whole separate issue there about prostitution, whether prostitution should be legalised, what that means within society. If Prince Andrew thought that he had been having sex with an adult, then you've got the whole issue of whether or not he's a man who uses prostitutes. But that is very different from somebody who knew that he was having sex with a minor. The fact that Prince Andrew allegedly was having sex with a minor in the company of a man who had convictions for trafficking minors, there's a whole issue there to do with credibility. Yeah. And I watched yet another car crash interview with Emily Maitlis. Hey, what was he thinking of doing that? If ever there was an example of a man who thought he was cleverer than those people watching him, and the rest of the world's watching him thinking, my goodness, you are so thick, to do that interview with the utter lack of self-awareness and compassion, but to say that it is convenient and that it is honourable to stay friends with a convicted paedophile, you just think actually his credibility for legal purposes, the allegations against him surely must be investigated further, because this was not a man who says, well, you know what, sometimes I use prostitutes and I always try to make sure that they're adult women. That's a different moral issue right there. But somebody who says, I knew that I allegedly, if somebody's asked, do you use prostitutes? You go, well, okay then. And then it's, well, yeah, but are you using young girls in the house of a man who is convicted, a sex trafficker? There's a whole new level of low and contemptible. And of course, he should be being investigated by the police. Yeah,
it's a fairly grim story all round. Everything to do with the Epstein case is really kind of disturbing. Speaking of Epstein,
the alleged suicide.
Well, well, I'm not going to get into that particular meme right now. But to another friend of Jeffrey Epstein, President Donald Trump. On Friday, he said, frankly, I want a trial with regard to the impeachment process that's going on against him. The House of Representatives ended its public hearings this week, having heard some fairly damning testimony from a number of witnesses. And it does seem like there's a strong chance that that trial in the Senate will go ahead probably sometime in January. Do we think there's any hope that Donald Trump is going to be impeached, or is this just going to be a lot of hot air for the Democrats?
I think it's going to be basically, in my opinion, a theatre production. to possibly kind of settle a lot of people and put a lot of stories to bed. I don't think there's going to be anything coming out of it at all. I think they're just, theatre production comes to mind. Just to keep people happy and yeah.
Ruth, what do you think, Ruth?
I'm at the other end of the scale. I think that the evidence for impeachment is very, very strong. That the potential that then has to go into the other issues to do with the family connections that Trump has got. Why is it his daughter is at these top level meetings? The whole hegemony aspect, the nepotism aspect, which actually is in the Constitution that presidents are supposed to do that. That is an aspect. I think that the evidence is being built up over the last few years against him. The issue, ironically, for me, the issue is that he may not be prosecuted while he is still president, because the Democrats know that it might play badly against them within I've been listening to, I don't always sleep very well, and I often listen to the World Service, and listening to the American commentators talking about how it's playing out with those caucuses, that they don't care. Trump's minging tiny fingers could be in every little pie, and they still will vote for him because basically they're racist rednecks. I can say that because I'm not. I can be as political as I like when I'm talking about America. I think that there is a concern that if the Democrats go too hard against him, it will galvanize Republicans to go out and vote for him just on principle. So, and goodness knows what those principles are, but apparently there is a principle involved. So it looks as though, I was watching Bonnie Greer talking the other day about it. She's always an extremely interesting commentator, and there definitely seems to be a feeling that yes, the evidence is there. But this whole Ukraine thing is still going to explode in his face, I think. But whether or not the local politics of let's get him out, whether they will wait until after he is the president. So sort of the precedent that was set with Nixon, you kind of don't want the president of the United States to be sent to prison while he's still president. And I kind of think that actually partly some of the net is being cast wide enough to try and haul Mike Pence into it as well. So I suspect that the case is being made now and will tick along to try and discredit him enough through the primaries that the Democrats then win, and then they can. I think it is more likely that he would be a process would be put in place to impeach and imprison him potentially after he is no longer president. But you've got the whole thing about the tax returns as well. There's a storm going to break. I'm just not quite sure over which areas it will break, but I think that we've got a lot more to come. And again, you've got the whole Bannon background. There is a fulminating. There's a common thread, I think, that we really have to be aware of when we're looking at the politics of the far right. I think that there is more than one way to skin a cat, and I suspect that the Trump impeachment is part of a way into the whole Cambridge Analytica, Bannon, dark money. I don't know if anybody's ever watched The Great Hack. I don't know if I can plug it, but if you the Great Hack on, I've seen it on Netflix, and I mean I knew that a lot of this stuff was happening, but to see it evidenced in the way that it is. Anybody who hasn't watched it should be watching it, and then you can be in no doubt that Trump needs to be impeached, but in such a way that you start with the pulsating brainstem of whatever it is that Trump has, and then just peel back along through the nervous system that has is the intricate workings of this really nasty far right project, which I think bizarrely probably connects in. You've got Russia and Erdogan and Netanyahu, and you've got the Chinese, all these sort of the different power plays going on within the different governments and different factions within governments. I think that there seems to be some sort of, my kids would sort of put it in the way of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They used to say, well, it's like Hydra, it just seems that you pick at a thread and suddenly the whole thing's going to unravel. It's just whether or not the evidence is there and the energy is there and the commitment is there to see it through.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have actually gone slightly over our time today. The discussion was just so fun, I didn't want to let it stop. But so I'd like to thank Sam and Ruth, both of you, very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And to those of you at home, we'd like to thank you for joining us as well. We would just say, as always, making TV programmes is a very expensive business. It costs us £30,000 just to keep the lights on, pay the rent, pay for fuel for the van, just to do the very basics of what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland. And at the moment we're bringing in a wee bit less than half of that. So if you want to support independent Scottish broadcasting like this, then I'm afraid you have to reach into your pocket. If you've cancelled your TV licence, as I know many of you have in the last couple of years, then maybe think about donating a wee bit of that to Broadcasting Scotland so that we can help provide news presented the way that you would like to see it presented. There are a whole load of other kinds of programmes we'd love to produce if we could. We've got ideas about sport and music and all these other things that we'd love to turn Broadcasting Scotland into a full service TV channel. But we can't do it without your support. So if you're able to donate, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month will make all the difference. And if you're not able to donate that much, if you're not able to commit to that, any amount can be donated on the website as well. So do please support us in whatever way you can. And if you want to volunteer, especially if you're in the Glasgow area, that's you can get into the studio. If you want to learn about making TV programmes, if you're a journalist or a techie, or if you even want to take over my role, then you're more than welcome. Just get in touch with us. You can see our Twitter handle on the screen there. You can email us. You can reach us whatever way. You can see us at marches and all sorts of things. So do please talk to us. Every little bit of help makes a difference and helps us make Broadcasting Scotland into the channel that Scotland deserves. So once again, thank you to Ruth, thank you to Sam, thank you to you for joining us. And we will be back tomorrow night with Scotland at 7 as usual, so do please join us then. Thanks, goodbye.